If, like myself, you consider yourself a sussy gamer at the Funny House, then you were more than likely tuned into Gamescom's recent opening night live event, a yearly showcase curated by none other than the unstoppable, unquenchable Jeff Keighley. ONL as a showcase is a little weird in that it sort of plays third fiddle to Jeff's two other big yearly events, namely the Game Awards and Summer Game Fest. Nevertheless, Europe's premier late summer blowout arrived with a few good surprises under its arm. We're getting a new Mafia game, yeah, and now you can drive a buggy in the worst game Bethesda have ever developed. Brilliant. For me, the most interesting game shown at the event wasn't even shown at the actual event. Through a confluence of circumstances, I found myself accidentally watching the ONL pre-show, which, truthfully, I normally wouldn't even bother with. My ignorant expectation would be that you'd only see the good stuff during the main showcase. Imagine my surprise when all of the good stuff was actually nestled away in that pre-show. And by all of the good stuff, I mean We Harvest Shadows. Created by solo developer David Whaley, We Harvest Shadows describes itself as a farming horror allegory, which is a pretty nuts first way to position your new game if I'm being totally honest. Farming and horror are arguably two of the biggest genres in gaming at the moment. You're going to smash them together in order to produce an allegory? I'm beside myself. If you don't know the name David Whaley, then I'm sure you'll be familiar with his previous game, The First Tree. I don't mean to be disrespectful or overly glib here, but The First Tree is one of those games that you probably already have in your Steam library, despite having zero recollection of how it actually got there. It's a low-poly narrative adventure about a fox. It's a pretty game, and it came early in a glut of similar pretty games, but that tapestry is getting so long at this point that it's a good time for David to pivot over to a new project. Enter We Harvest Shadows. To coincide with the reveal trailer shown during that pre-show, a demo was released on Steam that you can go and play right now. I've played through that demo twice, clocking in about 4 hours total, and I really want to share my experience with you.
I've decided that this abandoned farm will be the place where I die. But until then, that leaves me with the ever-pressing question. How do I fill the time?
The demo opens with your character, Garrett, recalling the circumstances that landed him with a big old chunk of Appalachian acreage. It's a punchy and evocative sequence that establishes plot threads I hope we'll see elaborated on in the full game. I'm not going to spoil any details here, but Garrett's past relationships play a key factor in him choosing to eject himself from modern life and spend the rest of his days living off of the land. And it's that decision that yields every core mechanic in We Harvest Shadows. Once you're handed control of Garrett, you're left to get to grips with what is ostensibly a serviceable yet janky farming sim. Despite the game's reveal trailer suggesting a certain equilibrium between the horror, farming and story elements, it's fair to say that every mechanic in We Harvest Shadows exists to serve the narrative. It's not that the farming mechanics featured in the game are necessarily bad, they're just very hands-off. I initially sort of balked at this and kind of went, okay, I've been led up the garden path here. But as soon as I ticked off my first batch of in-game tasks and I started to progress the story, that's when it all clicked for me.
Man, it's pretty here. Not a soul for miles.
You see, there's a special interplay that exists between each of the game's core elements that creates a very specific mood and rhythm in We Harvest Shadows. I'll be honest, I've never experienced anything like this in a game before, and if the finished product can build on that feeling and sustain it over its entire runtime, then this is going to be one very special game. I know I'm being vague here, so let me elaborate. We Harvest Shadows is a narrative-led horror game underpinned by casual farming mechanics. 3 elements: horror, farming, and story. You would expect that one of those elements would stand out as the game's biggest strength, and generally speaking, especially seeing as it's an indie game, you would expect it to be the story. But it isn't. It's something different that ends up being this game's key draw. It's not one individual element, it's how each of these elements connects to one another. The beauty is somewhere in the in-between.
Huh.
As with any structurally oriented farming sim, you'll always have one eye on your personal itinerary, right? I gotta get to bed by a certain time so I can get up tomorrow and sell those tomatoes and buy that upgrade, etc, etc. We Harvest Shadows wastes no time in letting you settle into that loop of plan, cultivate, profit. It's only once you're comfortable by about day 4 or 5 that the game starts to poke at you with horror and story elements. Those horror and story elements are, again, fine. They aren't ruin your trousers scary. The story is, at this stage, still establishing its boundaries, but it's the fact that your peaceful little routine is being subverted in really clever and additive ways. It's the moments where your concentration is pulled away from beginner agriculture and onto, horrors unknown. David has nailed those moments. As a point of comparison, I think a lot of people, however rightly or wrongly, are going to compare We Harvest Shadows to The Forest, another excellent game by the way. The difference between these games is, I'd argue, also We Harvest Shadows' key strength. In The Forest, a particularly scary run-in with the game's local beasties can result in hours of lost progress, and that's where the peril comes from. In this game, those encounters aren't there to ruin your day, they're there to make you feel a certain way. A lot of indie, narrative-led walking sim type games can have this kind of eerie feeling that never crosses over into a big scary payoff. We Harvest Shadows plays on that, and it'll give you the payoff, but as I said before, it's secondary to how each core element interacts with the next. As a good example of that, something scripted and quite scary happens as you're making your way back to your homestead one early in-game night. It happens in the house, which is noteworthy in and of itself, because up until that point you're led to assume that outside bad and inside good, especially at nighttime. Depending on how you play, you may even be partially aware of the danger prior to facing it. I could hear something inside the house when I played the game. However, my girlfriend didn't and was met full force by the fright of it. So you go in, you experience a scripted scare, and you make your way to bed. It's what happens later that I'm enamored with. I got up the next in-game day and immediately locked back into farming mode as any real-life self-reliant farmer would. It wasn't until I had to take 5 to go and refill my in-game watering can at the in-game kitchen sink that I, as a player, reflected on that incident the prior night. The screen darkened, I could hear the watering can filling up, and it was only then that I started to consider the implications of those events. That's not meant to happen in games, that only happens in real life. If David Whaley intends for his farming mechanic to facilitate those moments, then hats off to him, because it's a stroke of genius. Contextualizing the horror within the scope of a normal day is not something I expected We Harvest Shadows to handle so adeptly. The quiet moments where the not quite right begins to fester, those are so powerful and so special. This is what I mean when I say that this game's value lies somewhere at the apex of that pendulum swing between all-out narrative horror and placid, albeit slightly janky farming sim. To call back to the game's trailer again, there are a few little teasers in there of moments not featured in the demo, and some of them are of the distinctly scary variety. Extra danger is cool, but I really hope that David still allows you that space to exhale and kind of reflect as the game progresses and as the stakes increase. As much as I love The Forest, I'd hate to see We Harvest Shadows mimic it, I'd hate to get up one morning and have to rebuild all of my chicken coops because the scary monsters conspired to take a big shit on them. From playing the demo and experiencing its taut pacing though, I don't think that'll happen. The demo actually ends with a kind of extended scripted sequence that is really, really great. There's a big scary moment right at the very end that's actually lifted almost wholesale from Silent Hill 4 The Room. I won't spoil it, but when you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a tantalizing homage, and it's used really effectively to lend more weight to the game's story. Now, to counterbalance all of this gushing praise with a bit of constructive criticism, I will say that the writing is a little on the nose at points. Garrett monologues during and after most of the demo's scripted sequences, and some of the lines are ropey and a little juvenile, especially when he beats himself up. Speaking of dialogue, actually, there are 2 moments in the demo that did make me chuckle. For whatever reason, Garrett specifically mentions how amazing the view is on 2 separate occasions. Two occasions that also happen to be the absolute visual low points in the demo. Look, it's a pretty nice looking game at points, but these moments are not it. It is not happening. In addition to that, there's also an early warning mechanic that I'd love to see revisited before the final game is released. On what I believe is the second in-game day, a painting appears on the wall of Garrett's front room, and he specifically remarks on it, saying like, oh, I don't recognise that, where did that come from, what is a painting?
I don't remember this being here.
And then a big tooltip pops up explicitly telling you that it's a scare dar. The more horrifying the painting looks, the game explains, the more likely you are to see scary stuff about the farm. If this painting serves as narrative impetus later in the game, then fair enough, keep it in there, but I would have much preferred to figure out its purpose on my own. Whatever, it's a small thing, but it does stand out. To be honest, the only thing we're really missing from We Harvest Shadows is a release date. I take a guess that we'll probably see it sometime around Halloween, you know, that's scary game season. I hope we'll see it then. I'm really eager to play more of this, and I hope I've shared enough to get you excited too. Have you played it already though? Let me know what you thought about it down in the comments if you have, because I haven't really seen anyone else's opinion on this game yet. You'll be seeing me again very shortly for more reviews, retrospectives and Steam Deck videos. Until then, see ya.